Well, I got my notes, check. Sunglasses, check. Hat, check. Pepsi, check. Thick skin, check. Let's go. Hey, welcome to Golden Blue Dude, everybody. If you're a college football fan, might as well hit the like and subscribe button because that's all we do over here. Go check out our Patreon page. We call our Patreons the shot callers because that's exactly what they do around here. And when the regular season gets here, our Patreons will get to decide which game we'll live stream, and you'll get to watch with Golden Blue Dude. And the score prediction contest will be coming back. Every week I pick out a game and my Patreons guess the score, and whoever comes closest to the score wins $20 every single week, and you can win as many times as you want. The higher the Patreon, the more guesses you get per week. You know, I think we all knew that Notre Dame had one of the biggest brand, if not the biggest brand in the nation, and they had some power in college football, but I don't think we realized just how much power until this week. Well, we found out that USC and UCLA, they were going to the Big Ten. Then we found out that the Big Ten really wants Notre Dame. That was actually one of the reasons why they brought in UCLA and USC. I mean, they do have massive TV markets, and they're going to bring in a lot of money for the Big Ten, but it was a small part of the reason why they brought them in. And so then they started courting Notre Dame. Hey, would it be okay if we brought in Oregon? Would you be okay with that? Hey, we'll bring in Stanford as long as you come into the Big Ten. So they really wanted Notre Dame, and then I started to find out that Notre Dame actually is turning down the Big Ten. Notre Dame could affect the very future of college football with their decision. The biggest consequence to this would be the ACC, as far as if Notre Dame did choose the Big Ten, then the ACC wouldn't exist. That would be game over for the ACC. And just the mere rumor of Notre Dame possibly joining the Big Ten caused teams like Clemson, Florida State, Virginia, and North Carolina to start preliminary talks with the SEC. But now that Notre Dame is kind of backing off and saying, I'm not so sure about that, we're actually probably not going to join the Big Ten, I haven't heard much about those preliminary talks anymore. Because here's the bottom line, guys. The teams that are in the ACC, and I've said this 1,000 times, they love being in the ACC. They just don't love the money at all. So if there's an actual glimmer of hope that the ACC could somehow, some way approach the type of money that the Big Ten and the SEC is making, then the ACC schools will actually stay in the ACC. The one thing that's going to make it difficult for the ACC to get picked apart, even if Notre Dame were to join the Big Ten, is the grant of rights. It's pretty solid. I mean, if teams leave the ACC, they're giving up their TV rights up until 2036. That's a big deal. I've heard from Mark Rogers and from some other people that that's actually able to be worked around. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know how feasible that is. But if it is able to be worked around, and there goes the ACC. The ACC has no leverage at all. But if the ACC were to bring in Notre Dame and a partner, or even more teams than Notre Dame and a partner, they have more than enough leverage to rework a negotiation. And I've been telling you over the past 10, 11 months that my sources have stayed strong on this story that the ACC wants to bring in Notre Dame and West Virginia. And I kind of backed off that once I heard that Notre Dame was talking to the Big Ten. I'm like, there is no way that Notre Dame is going to turn down that big money. And if Notre Dame's not going to the ACC, then West Virginia most certainly is not going to the ACC. And then I heard that Notre Dame is actually refusing the Big Ten, so maybe they were right all along. So here's what I did. Once I started hearing that Notre Dame was actually turning down the Big Ten, I turned back to my sources. And I'm like, what's going on, guys? What is going on? Things are crazy, dominoes are falling, and nobody knows what's going to happen next. And here's what they said. They said, well, you know, we've been trying to tell you that it's going to be West Virginia and Notre Dame, the ACC. I know that was put in jeopardy because of talks that Notre Dame could possibly join the Big Ten, but that was never really an option. And what's really going to happen is the ACC is going to add 4 teams by 2025, 2026. That blew me away because that was the first time that I had heard that. I had heard Notre Dame and West Virginia to the ACC for a very long time, but 4 teams, that was the first time. Now the question is, who would those 4 teams be? Well, teams 1 and 2 would have to be Notre Dame and West Virginia. Listen, Notre Dame alone would give the ACC leverage to renegotiate that TV deal. I kind of misunderstood the contract. I thought it was built into the contract that, hey, if Notre Dame joins the ACC, it still can't be renegotiated because it's already in the contract. That's not true at all. Notre Dame joining the ACC full-time as a full-time football member would actually give value to the TV deal. That, in and of itself, could help renegotiate the TV deal. And then for West Virginia, the number one #1 fan base in the new Big 12, tied with Kansas as the highest revenue producing program in the new Big 12. This is not counting Oklahoma and Texas. The caveat to that is they're near the bottom in profit because of their travel expenses. So they're at the top whenever it comes to revenue, but they're at the bottom when it comes to profit because of travel expenses. That's why West Virginia, the ACC, makes sense for West Virginia as well. The travel expenses almost completely offset the revenue that they're making in the Big 12. That's how bad it is. So teams 1 and 2, West Virginia, Notre Dame. What about teams 3 and 4? Well, one of them could be Memphis, maybe? Memphis is renovating their football stadium. They have a pretty good sponsor with FedEx. The Memphis TV market is pretty large, and it would stretch the footprint of the ACC into Western Tennessee. Memphis is the best available remaining Group of 5 member for the ACC. The name East Carolina has come up. Nope, not going to happen. ACC already has 4 teams in the state of North Carolina, and there's not that big of a TV market for East Carolina. Sorry, that's not going to happen. What about South Florida, USF? They had decent success in the Big East. Nope, not going to happen. The ACC already has 2 teams in the state of Florida. I guess they could have a good TV market in Tampa, but Tampa really doesn't support USF unless they're having a really good season, and that's few and far between. So that's not going to happen. Nobody out of Conference USA, that's not happening. Nobody out of the remaining independents, including Army, that's not going to happen. Nobody out of the MAC, that's not going to happen. Nobody out of the Sun Belt, that's not going to happen. Nobody out of the Mountain West, that's not going to happen either. And nobody out of the Pac-12. No, not even Oregon would add any type of decent value to the ACC. And that would just add an element of headache to travel for the ACC teams. They would not go for that. But then there's Stanford. They're in the Pac-12. Could the ACC add Stanford? Well, maybe. Hold on here. Hold on. Stanford might be the one team out of the Pac-12 that could maybe make sense for the ACC, but only if it meant getting Notre Dame full-time in football. Otherwise, no deal. So the only way Stanford would be brought into the ACC is if it meant a commitment from Notre Dame as a full-time football member. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. What about Navy? This is an interesting argument. Navy is also a rival of Notre Dame that the Irish play every single year. And they do have a decent fan base. The ACC could perhaps draw revenue out of the annual Army-Navy game. And trust me, that does draw a lot of money. The ACC would also gain a TV market in the state of Maryland that they lost when Maryland went to the Big Ten. But the fact remains, this only makes sense if it means getting Notre Dame full-time in football. Of course, we already know that nobody from the Big Ten is coming to the ACC, and nobody from the SEC is coming to the ACC. Then there's the Big 12. This is where things could get interesting. If West Virginia goes to the ACC, could West Virginia talk somebody else from the Big 12 to come with them? The answer is yes, if the money is right. First, we have the Texas schools. There are 4 Texas schools in the new Big 12. I'm not counting any of the new members that are about to join the new Big 12, so I'm leaving Houston off the board. You have TCU. They have proven to be a valuable Power 5 member, and they have a pretty good TV market in Fort Worth, Texas, near Dallas. Then there's Baylor. Baylor's stock is at an all-time high right now. They have consistent recent success in football, and they have a recent basketball national championship, and a decent TV market in Waco, Texas. Then there's Texas Tech, with the second biggest fan base behind West Virginia in the new Big 12. And it gets the ACC in the state of Texas. Another thing that the ACC would gain by grabbing a school out of the state of Texas is they would in some way counter the SEC with the footprint in the state of Texas. Now, having Texas and Texas A&M is a lot bigger than having like a Baylor, a TCU, or Texas Tech, but you still have a presence in the state of Texas to go along with the SEC. So jumping out of the state of Texas and jumping into the state of Oklahoma. What about Oklahoma State? Well, Oklahoma State has a great fan base, 3rd largest in the new Big 12. They have great boosters that have a lot of money, and Oklahoma State is actually number 1 in profit in the new Big 12. And that's a Midwest TV market that the ACC would get. Then there's Iowa State, the closest new Big 12 member to the ACC, not counting the new members. So we're not counting Cincinnati, UCF, Houston, or BYU. Iowa State is the closest. And it would give the ACC a TV market in the state of Iowa. Iowa State is in the top half in revenue and fan base size in the new Big 12. That wouldn't be a bad addition for the ACC. Then finally, the Kansas schools, Kansas and Kansas State. Here's the thing. If the ACC does decide to pursue the state of Kansas, they would have to get both Kansas and Kansas State. They wouldn't get one without the other. That just wouldn't make sense. Now for Kansas, they are tied with West Virginia in revenue-producing programs in the new Big 12, but that's mainly because of basketball. If the ACC were to get Kansas and Kansas State, obviously they would own the entire state of Kansas as far as TV market. And don't forget, Kansas just won the national championship in college basketball this year and is a blue blood in basketball. That would help the ACC's basketball side tremendously. Another thing with Iowa State, Kansas, and Kansas State is that Notre Dame would actually have two close members in the Midwest. And with the Kansas schools, you'd have decent TV markets in the cities of Topeka, Lawrence, Wichita, and Kansas City, Kansas / Missouri. And the ACC would stretch its footprint significantly. So after hearing all the arguments, and West Virginia and Notre Dame being teams 1 and 2, who do you think would be teams 3 and 4 for the ACC? I'm telling you, that's what I'm hearing from my sources. They're looking for 4 teams by 2025 and 2026. That's all I got for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.